What is going down, SDS? We are back, and you know this guy right here. This is the Splash Cousin, Jordan Elliott of Niners Nation, joining us. It's been too long, Jordan, but I'm excited to get into you with the San Francisco 49ers versus the Cardinals coming up. Big game on Monday Night Football. We're going to get into it all right after this. Let's smash that like button if you haven't already. Love to see it. Oh, yes, the boys are back. It is good to have you in here. How are you feeling, Jordan? I mean, we haven't talked for a while on this channel. How are you feeling about the San Francisco 49ers up until this point? It's been a lot of conversation, right?
Oh, I'm feeling great, man. It's Friday. The sun's out. I'm back. SDS, the best chat on YouTube. Shout out to the sourdough squad out there. It's good to see you guys. Yeah, man, I'm having a good time. Thanks for having me back, man. It's been a while.
Absolutely. It's been too long, but I mean, you're out here cooking, man. You're writing for Niners Nation. You were on 95.7 The Game earlier today. Shout out the roast. What's it like, man? Because, we kind of grew up in this stuff together. We were live streaming the draft just a year ago. Just what's it been like for you and like kind of your growth up until this point?
Dude, it's been a dream come true, honestly. Like, I love talking about football, and if my employer's listening, please, earmuffs. Like, I would do this for free, honestly. I love talking about football. The paycheck is very welcome, but I would do it for free because I love doing this. So to be able to do it in a professional manner now, and to be able to be compensated to literally just sit around and watch film and talk about football and talk about all the great things that come with football. I could not be happier, honestly. And it's been so fun doing it in an area where, we both grew up and are familiar with. So the other day I did a stream. I do streams pretty often with Larry Krueger. I grew up listening to Larry Krueger on KMBR, like getting on 95.7. Like, I've been listening to 95.7 for years. So it's like so cool that all these areas where, we were consuming content, we are now a part of the content. And
I said, oh, there he is. We got a bet. There we go.
Oh, did I drop out for a second?
You dropped out for a second. You were talking about listening to 95.7.
Okay, yeah, just consuming all the stuff that we've done here in the Bay Area, and being, I grew up a 49ers fan. I've been around that my whole life. So getting the chance to do it now, on a daily basis, and have someone willing to literally give me money to do it is like a dream come true, and something I never thought that would ever be possible. And, it wouldn't have been possible along the way without all the, people that tune into the shows like these, or who read and share our articles and the written stuff we did. And, it'll always be Mel and Todd forever, man. I'll never forget those 5-hour draft streams we did back in 2021.
Todd. I mean, those were the glory days, but I mean, it's been a blast, man. And also too, just like watching you develop within the community, man. You're putting out right now probably the top-notch content for I mean, right now you're killing the game defensively. So I actually want to start there with you. What is your like overall takeaway from the 49ers defense up until this point?
I just think that they're an incredible unit, and I think we got robbed of a generational defense because of the injuries to Eric Armstead and Emmanuel Mosley. And I think it's been very admirable the way that they've filled in, and other guys too, like Azeez Al-Shaair. They've had some injuries to some frontline guys that they've been able to overcome, and they're still the number one defense in the league. But I think had those guys stayed healthy and been able to be on the field more, we would be talking about this defense in the same mold of a 2002 Buccaneers, of a 2000 Ravens, of a 2015 Broncos, because they really are that talented top to bottom. And I think the fact that they've missed two starting players who are two of their most important players, and they're still the number one defense, and they missed Bosa for a game and a half, like, it just feels like when you look at the whole sample size, they've been able to absorb those losses and not miss a beat. And I think that that's just so special that they've been able to rally around having that depth and that belief and trust in one another.
Absolutely. And there's been A lot is made about Nick Bosa, and rightfully so. He's definitely in the conversation right now for defensive player of the year, and we'll definitely touch on him a little bit. But I know you've been doing some phenomenal breakdowns of probably one of the more underrated 49ers out there right now. Talk to the SDS squad a little bit about Charles Omenihu and what that guy is doing, because he is cooking out there. And I know you're giving him his credit. I don't know if he's getting enough credit from the rest of the fan base. What is Charles Omenihu doing right now?
I knew that was coming right when you said most underrated, because I know you're in those trenches with me, watching the stuff that maybe doesn't get seen. You can't. It's so hard. So first of all, it's so hard to see a lot of this stuff when I'm watching the broadcast angle, when we all are watching the games live. So it is one of the benefits of having time to go back and review it. So I can understand why there's a little maybe gap between the Omenihu praise and where it is deserved and where it might be. I don't think it's because 49ers fans aren't willing to do it. I think it's just because it's hard to see that stuff unless you're watching for it intently, which
Right.
I've been doing week after week, because this guy just blows me away, dude. First of all, the ability to play on the outside and kick inside is something that will always be extremely valuable in my eyes. It's one of the reasons why I think Eric Armstead is one of the most valuable pieces on that defense. It's one of the reasons why I think Arden Key got such a hefty payday from the Jaguars. And it's one of the reasons why Omenihu has been so important for the 49ers, because he has that ability to play the edge on base downs. He can play the edge in pass rushing situations. But when you're able to kick him inside and isolate him on a guard or have him run a stunt into a center, this guy is just such a great blend of speed. He's a technician, but he's also really powerful. And I think the best example of that is this year, he's gone to this, double swipe move, scissor swipe, whatever you want to call it, where he's one where you swipe the hands away. And he's had a really, really good success rate going to that pass rushing move this year. If you go to my Twitter, for those of you on Twitter, if you just type in my name and type in Omenihu scissor swipe, there's a ton of cut-ups I've put of that if you want a more visual aid for that. And in that Chargers game on the very last play when there was the interception, he went to that scissor swipe, and the first-round rookie for the Chargers, Zion Johnson, was able to counter it. And Omenihu adjusted and countered with a long arm that was so powerful that he was able to drive Johnson back with the one arm into the chest plate and then get to Justin Herbert and get a hand on him as the ball was coming out. And frankly, if you go back and you watch that play, the 49ers were in a cover 2 coverage. And I forget the receiver who was open down the sideline, but if Omenihu doesn't get there, there's a good chance that ball gets completed and the receiver goes out of bounds at midfield. And at that point, there's still 40 some odd seconds left. And, the odds aren't great for the Chargers, but he made a game-saving play in my eyes by doing that. And I think that Huff deserves a ton of credit for going there and having the instincts to get that ball that didn't have the traditional Justin Herbert velocity on it. But it was a perfect example of all of what he brings to the table in a rep that happened on the biggest stage. And I think the biggest thing, too, with Omenihu is that he's done it on the biggest stage already for the 49ers. If you go back to that game in Dallas last year, he had 6 pressures and 2 sacks against arguably the 49ers' biggest rival and against a probable future Hall of Famer in Tyron Smith. So
that was the game, too, where Nick Bosa left the game. They needed someone to step up.
Mm-hmm. And he's just somebody I could spend 3 hours talking about all the Omenihu tape that I've broken down. I'll leave you guys with a good stat, though, so I don't just keep rambling. He's had 29 pressures this season on 220 pass rushing snaps among all players in the entire NFL with 220 pass rushing snaps or less. So basically the same volume of work as Omenihu. There's only 2 players who have more pressures, and that's Jerry Hughes and Rashawn Gary. And Rashawn Gary looked like a Defensive Player of the Year candidate before he got hurt. So he's in extremely good company right now. He's a fantastic player. And already the 49ers have gotten beyond great value for the trade they made for him last year when you consider the pick they gave up to get him. But now it's turning to the point where it's like, how do we start budgeting this guy into next year? We can't let him walk in free agency. We need to keep this guy going forward because he's been that much of a difference maker for them.
Well, right. And you started talking about how the 49ers have missed Eric Armstead and how we could be potentially talking about this team with the likes of the elites in the NFL with that pressure on the interior, maybe next to Omenihu or mixed in with someone else. But Omenihu has been had to be leaned on to step up in that role. And he's done a phenomenal job. And I honestly, I'm going to be honest, I haven't dove into the defensive tape yet from the Chargers, But just thinking back to it and the way you explained it, you're absolutely right. I believe it was Palmer running down the left sideline, and he was in that little gap of the cover too. And if it wasn't, and we know Justin Herbert, he's got an elite arm. He can put the ball wherever he wants to. If it wasn't for Charles Omenihu beating a first, again, Zion Johnson, we got a lot of respect for Zion Johnson coming out of, I believe it was Boston College. He was a big time draft riser, all that kind of stuff. He's a good offensive lineman. Charles Omenihu did a really good job to force that bad throw. That we give a lot of credit to Talanoa Hufanga for making a great heads up play, but that play doesn't happen without Charles Omenihu, right?
Exactly. And it's just gotten to the point where this guy has just time and time again delivered in those big moments, delivered on a big third down. And I knew he was a good player. I wrote an article about him in the offseason, actually, and highlighted some of the stuff he did against Dallas. I did not know that he was going to make this monumental of a leap and there's a strong argument to be made that he's been the second best defensive lineman. Not only, I would say, just for the 49ers, but, I would say second, I got to give Aaron Donald his credit, so I'll take that back. But he's been among the best in the division. I was going to say, you could almost say the second best in the division, but I have to give Aaron Donald his credit. I was getting a little ahead of myself there.
Who?
Yeah, but he's by far been the second best defensive lineman for the 49ers this year. And it's been so huge to have somebody to compliment Nick Bosa the way he has. And I just think that in an age where everything is focused on skill position guys and quarterbacks and scoring points and stuff, guys like Omenihu tend to fly under the radar for the stuff they've been doing. And when you have a guy that you're only paying, I think it's like $2.5 million is the cap hit he has this year, and his pressure rate's 13.5%. Like, it's just the value the 49ers are getting for him. I can confidently say that he would be among the greatest values if you're looking at production compared to cost in the entire NFL. And that's any position, any team around the league. I think he's firmly in that discussion based on what he's done for them.
Well, I think the 49ers traded him or got him for a 5th round draft pick, something like that. Like, really, his production is exceeding not only how much he's getting paid, but what it took to get him in the building. And you've done a phenomenal job of showcasing all those reps and sometimes it's not always going to show up on the stat sheet too, right? Like the way he's generating pressures, forcing quarterbacks to roll out of the pocket, maybe into other sacks or other poor situations. He's impacting the play on the field much more than the stat sheet might indicate, would you say?
Oh, absolutely. And it's another reason why I would always encourage anybody evaluating defensive line play based on like a box score or stat sheet. Always go to pressures before you go to sacks, because sacks are so dependent on outside things. It could be coverage. It could be the quarterback holding the ball too long. And while pressures aren't foolproof, typically a pressure will be far more indicative of a player beating their assignment and winning their one-on-one rep or whatever their responsibility is on that given rep. And Omenihu's a guy where he's consistently had multiple pressures throughout the season. I think there's only 2 games this year where he hasn't had multiple pressures in a game, and he's had a handful with 3, 4, 5. So yeah, he's been invaluable to this team, and wherever they end up going this season, he will be a major part of whatever story they end up authoring down the backstretch of the season.
Absolutely. And I like to stay. I want to stay on this defensive side of the football, but before we go to the next guy I want to talk to, got to shout out Curtis Polk for joining the SDS. Appreciate you guys as always for the support. Smash that like button, all that good stuff. You already know what to do. But I want, because you put out this tweet and I freaking love it. I want all the Fred Warner propaganda right now. You said, I believe something along the lines, it's time to talk about Fred Warner as a potential MVP candidate. I want to give you an opportunity to kind of speak to the people about that, because I think when we think of MVP candidates, you think of the quarterback, you think of offensive players putting up insane offensive numbers, Justin Jefferson, maybe, with his circus catch and all that type of stuff. But tell me how good of a season Fred Warner is having right now.
He's been incredible. And I think, this is something that's very controversial, it feels like, but it's a point I always like to bring up because I think it at least generates an interesting discussion, right? So if you talk about the most valuable player on the 49ers defense, 9 out of 10 people are going to tell you it's Nick Bosa, right? Which I think is hard to argue against given the impact he has. But what I always go back to is Bosa missed the last basically 14 and a half games of the 2020 season. And while the season as a whole didn't go great for the 49ers, they still had a top 5 defense. And that's no knock on Nick Bosa, but the common denominator with all of that was Fred Warner was a first-team All-Pro player that year. He was a guy that was still making plays all over the field. And I could make a strong argument. People may not want to hear it, but I could make the argument that Fred Warner and what he brings to the 49ers defense is more difficult to replace than what Nick Bosa brings to the 49ers defense. Both are fantastic players in their own right, but what Fred Warner is able to do in all 3 phases of the game, whether it's coverage, whether it's rushing the passer, whether it's fitting his run gaps, he does it all, and he does it all at an elite level. And when you factor in what he does in coverage, I have never, ever seen a linebacker in the NFL that is able to handle the coverage assignments that Fred Warner is given week after week. And Brad, the thing is with me is that it's not only that he's given these assignments, he's made them look so routine that I have to like splash cold water on my face and like slap myself and remind myself like, no, this is not normal. Like stop glossing over this. When I'm going back and watching game film, I'm like, dude, this is a big deal. Like you need
like 10 years ago, linebackers did not even play like this, not even close.
And it's just like, so there was a play against the Chargers, right? So the 49ers ran this, like, it was like a cover 1 peel coverage where they're basically in a cover 1 look, and they had Nick Bosa basically he was peeling. So when the running back stays into pass protect, Bosa's going to rush the passer. If the running back comes out of the backfield, Bosa's the one that's handling him in coverage and is going to mirror him out of the backfield. And what happened essentially was Fred Warner was essentially tasked with handling 2 receivers on his own in space. And what he was able to do was sell that he was carrying the first receiver vertical before jumping on the crossing route over the middle that was in Herbert's line of sight when he was rolling out of the pocket. It was a great pressure, too. The 49ers ended up sending 6 on this cover 1 peel pressure. But the way he was able to seamlessly just remove 2 receivers out of the progression and just do it in a way where it just looked so routine that I had to like go back and watch it 2 or 3 times. I'm like, this is generational kind of stuff. Like, this is not just, that Fred Warner guy's pretty good at football. It's like, no, like,
it's pretty good. It's
like
all right.
groundbreaking, revolutionary stuff at the NFL level for a linebacker to do. And I think that 49ers fans appreciate it. But when you start to have that discourse at a more national level, that kind of thing doesn't show up in a stat sheet. So when people, I think Shaquille Leonard is a great player. I think Levante David's a great player, Bobby Wagner. But whenever I see this discourse, it's always tackle numbers or sacks or, tackles for losses. How do you quantify play where Fred Warner by himself is taking 2 players out of a progression on a pressure that's resulting in an incompletion because the quarterback has nowhere to go? It's something you have to see, and there is no way to put it on a stat sheet. So right. I just think the thing is with Fred Warner is there's so many things that he does where I just am sitting here going, I've never seen this before. And I think that that's so cool, dude, because football has been played for a long time. And a lot of what we're seeing is just, hey, you're doing something that we've seen before, but you're doing it at a high level. Fred Warner is like writing a new chapter of what to expect from linebackers in that position. And I think that's so awesome, dude.
Well, it's wild because like coming out of BYU, no one knew what the hell he was. Is this guy an edge rusher? Is he a slot cornerback? Is he a safety? Like, what the hell is he? Meanwhile, D'Amico Ryans is out here licking his chops at all these safety hybrid linebackers. I mean, you look at the entire crop: Dre Greenlaw, Zizal Shire, your young guys, Marcelino, McCrary, Ball. Like, they're all like safety hybrids, right? They're all guys that can cover, but they're all extremely aggressive and come downhill and they'll thump you too. It's like they're really finding a player archetype, right? Like in that regard.
And they've been successful doing it because I think it's easy to be like, okay, well, every team should start doing that. But what the difference with the 49ers is that they've found a way to really maximize those guys in those roles and find a way to really get them comfortable in that role where they are going to be a linebacker technically, but you're going to get the same kind of coverage assignments you would have had when you were a defensive back. And, like Greenlaw was, a safety at one point. DFF was a safety at one point. Like once you get those instincts playing as a defensive back, it's hard when you're not playing that position week in and week out, but it's kind of like riding a bike, right? That's what I kind of would equate it to. You're always going to have those instincts kind of built in when you have that body of work they have. So I think it's so cool that the 49ers are able to go into a nickel coverage. And while most teams would be sitting out there with 5 defensive backs, they have 7 because you have Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw out there. And you have these guys that are able to cover like a defensive back. And I think that there's no coincidence that that's why they look like one of the better pass coverage defenses in the NFL, even with the injuries they've sustained in the secondary.
Absolutely. I'm excited, man. The 49ers, you got Azeez Al-Shaair back last week too. Dre Greenlaw's been playing lights out this year. I think both of us, we've had questions about Dre Greenlaw back and forth, but honestly, he's been playing really, really well this year. But still, the guy who's reigning supreme in that linebacking room, the king, the lion, as they call him, Fred Warner, man. And I like the idea of getting him in that conversation. Of course, it's going to take a bigger media conversations because I think one of the biggest things that I've learned is you really need the media on that hype. Like if the media isn't hyping them up, putting out the graphics, putting out the little hits, it's hard to get some recognition because sometimes just a lot of people focus on that, right? So Fred Warner is definitely playing at that level. Now we just need to get the actual recognition to follow it, right?
Yeah, and you know what the hard part is? So it's easy for me to do, right? Because I do 49er stuff 7 days a week. I'm grinding film, pulling stats, obviously watching the games when they happen. But I will concede this, because I think it's very difficult for a lot of these voting things, right? Because with Fred Warner, it's beyond just the stat sheet. And there's plenty of other players on other teams where somebody could make a similar argument. I don't have the time in my week to balance the workload I have doing 49er stuff and watch all 22 for every other.
You can't go watch all Micah Parsons reps and see what he's doing and be like, this is why.
Exactly. So it's really hard, but I'll give a perfect example, right? So like last year, Robert Quinn was voted as an All-Pro, and I had I have no bone to pick with Robert Quinn. I think he's a fine NFL player. I think he's been a consummate pro for a long time. Nick Bosa obviously got snubbed, and where everyone directed their hate was at like Max Crosby. And how did Max Crosby end up as the All-Pro over Nick Bosa? And to me, it should have been Crosby, but Crosby had like 108 pressures or something ridiculous last year. To me, he was deserving of his All-Pro selection. But with Robert Quinn, he had 18 sacks. So you look at that number, you're like, wow, 18 sacks. Like, of course, this guy's a first-team All-Pro. He only had 48 pressures. Bosa and Crosby both had more than double that. And that's what gets me is I don't want to speak for other media members, but to me, what it felt like was the people who vote on those things saw the sack total from Robert Quinn, and that was enough for them. They didn't really have to go any farther. They didn't look at pressures. They didn't look at, the tackles for loss and some of the way these players are utilized, the double team rate and all those other things that we are fortunate enough to have at our disposal. And I think that's where it's the hardest, Brad, is that until there's a concerted effort to really do the best we can to recognize what players on teams that we don't cover are doing, I feel like these awards are always going to be really hard because there's no world that exists where Nick Bosa. Same thing with Trent Williams last year. I made a tweet about it. I remember Trent Williams wasn't a first-team All-Pro last year, and I think it was Rashawn Slater and Orlando Brown. And Orlando Brown was fine for the Chiefs, and Slater was one of our favorite guys in the draft. But I went and literally pulled the numbers, and they both I think Orlando Brown allowed 15 more pressures or something like that than Trent Williams did. His run blocking was nowhere near. There's no reason for it. So to end my long-winded rant, I just think that it's unfortunate that a lot of those awards just get voted on what feels like easy 5-minute box scores that somebody could Google real quick and then submit their vote, and then that's that. And I think it's really unfortunate because it ends up hurting and defining legacies in a way that it shouldn't. And I think that's the unfortunate part,
Absolutely. Shout out, Coach, for the super chat. He says the difference between the Niners and the rest of the league is we have a staunch identity on both sides of the ball. Our value and development in players is specific to our philosophy. It allows us to buck the trends. Love it. Quick thoughts on that from Coach.
So one thing I've been thinking about a lot, right, is so this year the NFL scoring average is the lowest it's been since 2009. The average yards per completion is the lowest it's been since 1933. The average yards per carry, highest it's ever been. So right now, basically what you're getting is this Vic Fangio revolution where teams are in too high with light boxes all the time and they're limiting these big plays downfield. Teams are having to run the ball a lot more. And there's frankly a lot of teams where they might be able to do it 1 week here, 1 week there. But there are very few teams in the NFL who are built to pound the rock and really just relentlessly hammer opponents by running the football week after week after week. And the 49ers have not only been that team this year, but they've been that team for a few years now. And I think that it's really interesting that while teams started getting more into these vertical offenses and go to these big, mobile, strong-arm quarterbacks, which, it looked like the 49ers want to do too with Trey Lance. We'll see how that goes in the future. But while the league was kind of zigging, the 49ers zagged and had this old school West Coast yards after catch offense. We're going to run the ball 35 times. We're going to invest in the D-line when everyone else is investing in their receivers and their offensive line and their offense. So, I think that it's very interesting that the 49ers almost set themselves up for the way that the league is trending. And it may not have been intentional, but I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt that maybe this is something they saw coming and they didn't want to buck that trend. But yeah, I think Coach makes a great point. And I think that it's really fortunate that as the league is having problems throwing downfield, the 49ers are like, hey, we've been dealing with this for years and we've succeeded in spite of it. So it's not really tripping them up, if that makes sense.
We'll just go horizontal. Who needs to go vertical? Especially when you get Jimmy Garoppolo back. We got to give our boy some shine. He's been waiting. Chili's in the chat saying, when are you going to show my super chat, Brad? I got you. He says, is this a must-win game for us with a win to take over the division? Also, of course, join the Discord. Chili, my boy. We got the link for you. Of course, Chili's running our Discord. And we got your super chat up. And you're going to get the Jordan Elliott to answer your question right now.
Every win game is a must-win game, but this one is especially because if they don't, my Seattle Seahawks stay in first place, and that's the last thing that 49ers fans should want is, another week of that Pete Carroll grin and the gum chewing and Geno Smith for MVP stuff. So, yeah, I mean, I would say it's must-win just in the sense of if they keep stacking those division wins, nothing else is going to matter. If they're able to go 5-1 or maybe even 6-0 in their division, they're 3-0 right now. So if they win this game, they'd get them to 4. And then if they split the last two, they're 5-1 in the division. Their odds of making the playoffs are nothing's a certainty, but that would go a very long way for their their playoff chances. So yeah, I would say it's a must win. And just for the vibes, man, you're gonna be in Mexico City in front of we just saw what an international NFL game looks like. In an area where they don't get them regularly. I think London's been kind of it's losing its luster a bit because they get 4 or 5 games a year. But we just saw in Munich how just lively the crowd was and the energy. And I think you're going to see that in Mexico City too, where it's estimated that 82% of the crowd will be pro 49ers. So yeah, it is must win. Go out there, show out, get the division lead, and don't look back. I think that this is definitely a game that they have to have. If they lose, it's not the end of the world, but I would say it's must win just from the sense that you can really control your own destiny by doing so. So I'm going to say yes.
I would have to agree with that because these division games, 49ers already did a phenomenal job of sweeping those Rams and taking care of business, and they're one game up on Seattle, who's leading the division. Got to take care of the Cardinals, right? And the fastest path forward to the playoffs is through division. So you take care of those guys, you move forward, you're getting into the playoffs, and that's ultimately what we want because that's when the real season begins, is that playoff push for sure. Look at Chili. He's hyped. He said 4 new Discord members. You'll love to see it. We got Corey Soto dropping a super chat on us. He says, in life, as in football, inflexible identities can also prevent growth and adaptability, especially when it revolves around a singular idea of this. Gee, we're getting deep over here, Joe. Woo! That's not. I like it.
I love that. That is a fantastic. Right? Yeah, that is just incredible. I don't know if it'd be like advice, wisdom, whatever you want to label it. Right. Phenomenal.
That was fire. That was fire. That was really nice. Yeah, that's profound, as they say. But we'll bounce back and forth between the Cardinals focused, 49ers focused. I want to talk. You've also got another conversation going that I like because 4 months ago, if you would have asked me, dude, I went on, I think it was like CBS or whatever, and I said, there's a 0.001% chance that Jimmy Garoppolo returns to the San Francisco 49ers. Like, I was extremely confident that Jimmy Garoppolo was not going to be here. Now, as you kind of posed on Twitter, like, is he potentially making a case to be, whether it's statistically or however you want to quantify it, as like a top 10 quarterback in the NFL? Like, I don't know if he's quite there yet, but like the conversation I think can be had, which is what I think is the crazy part of this whole situation, right?
So let me give you guys a glimpse into a day in the life of me, right? So I'm driving, I'm sitting in traffic. I think I was on like the Dumbarton Bridge or somewhere, and I'm in traffic, and I was thinking about the Niners offense, some stuff I'd watched on game film earlier, and I'm like, man, are there 15 quarterbacks better than Jimmy in the league right now? And I preface the statement by saying, if you haven't had the chance to watch other teams, quarterback play is abysmal this year. There are a lot of players that may be more talented than Jimmy Garoppolo. They may have a greater body of work than Jimmy Garoppolo. But if we just isolate the 2022 season, they have been horrendous in comparison to Jimmy Garoppolo. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, man, are there 15? And then I started thinking about it, and I started up from 1 and I counted the guys I would definitively have in front of him. And I got to like 8 and like 9, like pretty confidently. And then it became a gray area where I'm like, dude, like, there's actually an argument to be made where he's been better than this guy, and I could argue he's looked better than this guy. And I'm like, is he a top 10 guy this year based on his improved play and the regression of quarterbacks around the league? And I think so. What I ultimately landed on was I think there's a firm case to be made that he's somewhere between like 9 and 12 based on the way he's played this season, which is a huge win for the 49ers, because 3 months ago he was on the trading block, and then 2.5 months ago he was the backup quarterback in week 1 in Chicago, and you're now talking about like a legitimate argument of him being a top 12 quarterback in the league. So I just think that right now it's a discussion that frankly needs to be had because he has looked just, I don't know what it is, Brad. Like he looks more confident throwing the ball downfield. He's throwing with anticipation better than I've ever seen him, more consistently than I've ever seen him. And he's gotten rid of those like, what the heck are you doing throws that would happen 3 or 4 times a game without fail. You might get 1, possibly 2. But beyond that, it's just like the aggression is there. The ability to push the ball downfield is there. And then the turnover plays that were so detrimental seem to have regressed in a major way. And the numbers back it up too right now. So like 2019 is the year that everybody points to as kind of his best season, right? So right now, his big time throw rate is almost twice what it was in 2019. And his turnover worthy play rate, so balls where, he's either turning the ball over or like that perfect examples, like that ball he threw where Jalen Ramsey had it in his hands, ended up dropping it. Those kind of throws are lower than what they were in 2019. So he's playing at a better level statistically than he was in the year the Niners went 13-3 and went on to the Super Bowl. And I think that that's something that is just, it's going to create a very interesting dialogue depending on how the season ends, because realistically, if you get to a point where this 49ers team is still grinding out games in the running game, Jimmy's converting on 3rd down the way he has been, and they somehow go on a run and win a Lombardi, how do you tell that locker room full of guys that have been playing with him for 5 years, like, hey, like it was a great year, but now we're going back to Trey Lance. And I have nothing against Trey Lance. This isn't a knock on Trey Lance at all, but this is the dilemma the 49ers invited when they made this move initially, and they still kept Jimmy around. And him playing the way he's playing has only intensified the probability that it gets complicated when the offseason comes around.
I mean, again, I had this, you forced me to think about that question, because I think based on 2019, the San Francisco 49ers had a phenomenal record, but I don't think we would say that was because of Jimmy. Jimmy definitely played a part. 4 come behind wins, the New Orleans game, the Rams game. Like, you could think where like we had to rely on Jimmy a little bit. Even that last drive, it was like week 3, week 2, whatever it was, against the Steelers. But he was never like that guy. Like, and we heard the basically narratives to come out about, when they get into the playoffs, they just run the football, this, that, and the other thing. But this version of Jimmy Garoppolo, which I think we've questioned Jimmy for the things that you've talked about. But for example, that play to Ray McCloud, out of structure, moving within the pocket, throwing on the run. Like, yes, to a Josh Allen, a Lamar Jackson, whoever you want to name. Okay, that seems like probably a throw that they can make with consistency. But that's pretty damn good right now for Jimmy Garoppolo. And you look at Derek Carr, you look at guys like Mac Jones, Ryan Tannehill, Marcus Mariota, Kyler Murray's, he's kind of going through it. Jared Goff, like Matt Stafford, he's worth talking about. Like, you know, in that range at least. I mean, if he's not top 10, he's scratching at the door. And if I think if the offense too as a whole, because I'd also love to get your insights on this. I don't think the offense is working at 100% capacity, efficiency, and things like that. I think they're still trying to gel. You had George Kittle talking about it earlier this week. There's like a level of intensity that's starting to build, and urgency. We've talked about urgency a lot this year with the 49ers offense. If they start to kind of cook a little bit, I think it's going to only elevate Jimmy Garoppolo and his play even further, right? If he continues to be efficient.
Exactly. And that's the thing, is that it's so fun. So these arguments get so skewed, right? Where it's like, we've seen Jimmy, we know what to expect, and he's going to regress, and he's going to do, like, he doesn't have to be Patrick Mahomes. He doesn't have to be Josh Allen. Some of those teams are structured and built in a way where they need their quarterbacks to play at a certain level to be a contender. The 49ers don't need that. Their team is built around their defensive line first. I would say the running game and the running offense second. And then, if you want to factor in like short area passing, like I think that the way that they have built this team is in the mold of a team that just doesn't need their quarterback to be Superman to pull out victory. Sure, it might need to happen at some point, and maybe it won't happen. But like I can see in the chat, like the biggest pushback I've gotten is like, oh, they haven't played anybody, and the bad defenses he struggled against, and or the good defenses, he struggled against. Denver was abysmal, right? I was in Denver for that game. I watched that game.
Oh, you were there in person for that gem?
I was in person for that game, and that game was just awful, right? And I'm not making excuses, but if we're looking at it objectively, it's like, all right, well, the guy didn't really have a training camp. He hadn't thrown a football in live, action in 9 months, whatever it had been. And it's really the lone outlier of their poor performance on third down. They were 1 of 10 on third down in that game. They're top 4 in the league, despite that 1 of 10 on third down in that game. So that's one where we can't just ignore it entirely. I'm like, all right, well, let's look at the rest of the sample size. And then the other really good top 10 defense they've played twice is the Rams. But Jimmy historically has done very well against the Rams. The 49ers have done well against the Rams. So I feel like that just gets written off like, oh, the 49ers own the Rams, so that doesn't count. When it's like, well, it kind of should. Raheem Morris is really good at what he does. The Rams defense is really good. It's the only reason they've been in games. If you've watched any of their games, their offense is putrid. The only reason they've even had a chance in a lot of these games is the defense. So I think, honestly, the thing with Jimmy is that, like, I'm not saying that he's one of the 10 most talented quarterbacks in football, right? I'm not saying that he is an MVP candidate. I'm not even saying that the 49ers have to think about bringing him back next year. I'm just saying that if you look at the production, if you remove the names off the jerseys and we just saw the player playing and the production they've put up, it's very hard to make the case for 12 players at the position who've been better than him this season. And to me, that's a major net win, considering the 49ers were, if they had traded him or something went a little bit differently, no disrespect to Brock Purdy, but they have the last pick in the draft as a rookie starting on a team that's built to win a championship right now. So if you look at where the 49ers end up and where they could have ended up, it's incredible how fortunate things turned out for them.
Absolutely insane. And you're kind of responding to like kind of what Corey's saying. Corey's saying not trying to hate, but is there a correlation between the weak schedule and JG's apparent growth? And, you just kind of spoke to that a little bit, right? You also, too, have to play who's in front of you. And so, I don't know. I think Jimmy's growth is much more than what defenses are and what they show. I think his growth is internal, kind of, in a sense. Like, yes, it matters the talent that you play against, but I don't think that's ultimately Jimmy's issues. Again, if I had to give my assumptions and assess what I think it is, I think it's more of Jimmy's just kind of processing within the structure of the play and hitting the timing based on what he sees and what have you. So kind of like the 49ers offense, like if they just do what they need to do, it ultimately doesn't really matter who's in front of them because they should be able to execute and play at a level where they're able to get things done. So I think you pretty much did a good job of addressing Corey's comment. Again, shout out to everyone who's sending super chat. Chili loves the beard apparently, so shout out Chili. Appreciate that, my guy. When are we going to get a beard on Jordan Elliott?
That one's not up to me, Chief. It would probably take me 4.5 years to get like a quarter of Brad's beard. So, I get this little stubble I shave every couple of days, but that's genetics out of my control, man. I don't know what to tell you guys. I apologize. I can maybe draw like a little Sharpie one, or I could get one of those like drawstring ones that I can like put on or something maybe, but I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I don't know if that's happening anytime soon.
Bro, we gotta get like a stash, like a little like pencil something, bro, for the culture. Bro, be fire, man. I'd love to see it, dude. Man, I forgot how much I missed freaking talking to you, man. This is so much fun when we get to just listen to this man's insights. Like, my guy's a wealth of freaking knowledge. I freaking love it. Coach dropping a 50 piece. Woo! Shout out, Coach. Appreciate you, man. He says, guys, don't do this. This team ain't built to carry this quarterback. That's so irresponsible. Two things can be true at once. We have a very talented team that is held back due to the inconsistencies of Jimmy Garoppolo. He's not better. The NFL is down. Let's not do this. Ooh, I think we got a nice little debate going here. So, do you think that Jimmy Garoppolo's perceived well play this year is a product of who he's playing against, not who he is and how he's developing internally?
No, not at all, and I respect Coach, and I am very appreciative for the dialogue I have with Coach. So I'm always open to the discussion, but for me personally, no, because I spend hours and hours every single week watching every single snap on both sides of the ball for this team. And there are certain things where I take my notes and I, just write little things off to the side where it's literally just been week after week where I'm like, I haven't seen Jimmy do this in years, or I haven't ever seen Jimmy do this. And that to me, again, I think there is a good point that the quarterback play around the league is bad. If you went back to last season and Jimmy was playing like this, he's probably 14, 15, somewhere in that range. The quarterback play I thought was actually really good last season. It's been
like Russ is someone who'd probably be above. He's fallen out. There's guys that aren't play like Stafford, you could say maybe he's fallen out a little bit. He hasn't been having a great year. So I think that's fair.
Yeah, and so that's where it's like another guy too, right? Like, so I just saw Don Burr's in the chat, and we're both Cal guys. Jared Goff has been really good this year. Jared Goff has looked like a good quarterback this year, and most people had him as like a bottom 5 starter last year. So it's not just Jimmy. Like, there's other quarterbacks who have really elevated their game and looked really good.
Kirk Cousins has been playing pretty well. Dare I say?
He's top 10, man. I'm a ride for my guy Kirk every chance I can.
Kirk O'Bangs, let's go.
The thing with Jimmy too is, right? So to me, it's really like, so what happens, Brad, I think, is that people see these throws that like Josh Allen's making 45 yards downfield on a rope, or Patrick Mahomes or Rodgers or Brady or some of these guys, and they get so enamored with it. And while those are great, if you can have them, and to me, it's a more exciting product. I love watching it as a fan of the sport. It's not what really matters as much as the intermediate area of the field, right? I think most NFL quarterbacks can operate in that short area, some better than others. But what really separates guys to me is where you can throw between 10 and 20 yards downfield. And this year, Jimmy's big time throw rate is higher than every single quarterback in the league on throws between 10 and 20 yards than 2 quarterbacks. Matthew Stafford and Lamar Jackson are the only guys who have a higher big time throw rate in that area of the field. So that means that Jimmy Garoppolo is throwing to that intermediate area, making these big-time tight window throws at a rate that is higher than Josh Allen, than Justin Herbert, than Mahomes, than Cousins. And again, that doesn't mean that he's better than any of those players. I would not make that argument because I don't believe that to be true. But I do believe that the body of work we're seeing backs up some of these things I'm seeing on tape where I'm like, man, like even just some of these throws, like he made a throw to Juwan Jennings on it was like 3rd and 8 or something like that, right? And I think it was Asante Samuel was in coverage on him. I apologize if it wasn't. I don't remember off the top of my head who the DB was, but they're in off coverage on Juwan Jennings, and he runs the scout route, which is basically an out route to the sideline where you push vertical to 10 to 12 yards and you cut out.
Exactly what you're talking about.
And Jimmy had this ball coming out before he was at the top of his stem. So he's literally turning and getting this ball on a timing throw, being thrown to a spot. outside the numbers from the far hash. And some people look at that and their first takeaway, Brian, is like, oh, he was wide open. And that's not all what this is about. It's about the timing, rhythm, and anticipation it takes to make those throws. And I haven't seen
trust to throw that, to just throw that before he's come out of his route.
Or that 3rd and 8, whatever it was on their second to last drive. Remember to Ayuk, where he threw it to Ayuk on that spot where the coverage was a lot tighter. I haven't seen that from Jimmy in a consistent manner ever. I've never seen him consistently do it week after week after week. And it feels like this season, there's at least 1 or 2 times a game where I'm like, I'm just like, I haven't seen this before, right? Like, it literally leaves me at a loss for words. And I'll concede that I kind of, I was having those takes around the Panthers game. After that game, I'm like, this is the best I've ever seen Jimmy play. And people are like, whoa, pump the brakes. It's a little early. And I'm like, okay, that's fair. I probably need to. But the sample size keeps getting bigger and he keeps staying consistent. And until the train completely derails, which I hope it doesn't, I'm going to stand by the fact that I think he's playing the best football of his career. And I think the tape and the numbers back that up.
And I think another example of just how well Jimmy is working is the drop that Ayuk had. Because originally, I believe he had Kittle to the right side of the field. Kittle was bracketed. He comes back. You have kind of a combo in the next progression, which is, it looks like it's either Debo or Jawan. Jawan's bracketed. Debo looks like he's running into kind of like a shell coverage. And he's able to work through his reads and shout out to Brandon Ayuk. He absolutely cooked the defender, but it was a long developing route. But it wasn't like a bang, bang thing where I think of Jimmy Garoppolo when I think of successful Jimmy Garoppolo, hit that hitch step, let it rip, short, 5 to 10 yards. He's got a whip on it. He'll throw a just dart over the middle. And sometimes you're like, okay, that's pretty damn good. But I think the point that you're also trying to make is we're seeing Jimmy do things at a more consistent level that we really haven't seen Jimmy do. And that's why we're kind of taking notice. I think we're both people who have looked at Jimmy Garoppolo and been like, man, this guy should be playing better. But I think too, when we look at everything, including last year's tape, the tape before, and then stacking against this year's tape, he is playing at a different level. He is playing with a little bit more moxie, a little bit more juice, as they say. And yes, this is a nuanced conversation. Part of the reason why we can have that conversation is because the rest of the league is also performing at a little bit lesser of a rate. Quarterbacks are a little bit of a drop-off opposed to previous years and things like that. But you also got to give credit where it's due, right? So, again, I think both of us have immense respect for Coach. And I think this is one of those agree to disagree moments. I think I understand where Coach is coming from. I definitely do. But I do think Jimmy is playing at a higher level right now than, we think of that 2017 5-game run, right? Where we're like, oh, Jimmy's the next Joe Montana. He was out here balling. And we hadn't really seen it since. We're getting some of that back a little bit, right? The little backyard dog, his first touchdown was a rollout to the left out of structure to Lewis Murphy. We're getting some of that, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing is that, and it's so funny because there's been so much unfortunate posturing between fans, it feels like, because of comments that teammates make about how much they believe in him and how much they all the intangible things that they really like. And I think, a lot of people who want to see a Trey Lance or see somebody play like that have really been put in a position where it's compromising because they're like, well, I don't care about the leadership. I want results on the field and stuff. But that stuff to me matters because I feel like there's a belief in him that does translate to the field where he knows that the other 10 guys in the huddle believe in him. And if there have been a lot of plays over the years where it would be very hard for me if I was a teammate of somebody pulling the trigger on some of the throws he made, where I'd be as jubilant to sing his praises as his teammates have been. So if they stuck by him through that, I can only imagine how elated they're feeling this year with the way he's playing. And I just think too that a lot of it does come down to the style of play. And I know you're going to get to it eventually. I did see the super chat. Corey's made some great points. I think he made another great one. Football is an entertainment business, right? We watch football to be entertained. I watch football to be entertained. And it is more exciting watching Jimmy Garoppolo throw off of one leg and hit a receiver downfield than it is to watch him throw a screen to Deebo Samuel behind the line of scrimmage. Even though I'd argue that there is something pretty fun about watching Deebo bowl over defenders at the second level, I completely understand the desire to want to see a more explosive talent at the quarterback position when you are seeing highlights every week of these throws that the Herberts and Mahomes and Lamar Jacksons and Allens and all these guys are making. So I just want to put that out there that I think it's totally fair to make the argument what I believe Corey's making, where it's like, hey, I want to see the 49ers win. Like, I'm a 49ers fan, but I want an entertaining product too. And I think that that's a totally fair argument to make. And it's completely different than the argument that, like, oh, they're just winning in spite of him, or they're not going to win because of him and all these things. Because there's so much evidence to the contrary at this point. And I promise you guys, Brad's known me for a few years now. When I first met Brad, I was the loudest Jimmy detractor of my entire existence covering the sport of football. Was like, hey, this team is so talented and this guy's holding them back. And I could give you 80 million different reasons why I felt that way.
Jordan would have been Jimmy Stan's enemy number one a couple years ago. So again,
I understand,
objectivity right now is what we're trying to obtain. Like, you're allowed to be fluid and evolve, I think. And I think that's, where this conversation kind of can get divisive is, some people just kind of want to stick with where they were at. But just like everything in life and just like football, it evolves, it changes week to week. And then you start to track trends and like, okay, is this a one-off? Is this a consistent like improvement? Are we getting a lot of these types of dips? I think we're seeing Jimmy kind of inch his way up. And, let's say, he wasn't great against the Chiefs, but hey, he was good against the Rams. He was good for the most part against, these other teams like the Falcons, the Panthers, and the Chargers. So he's putting together at least a body of work where I think we're like, well, he's doing pretty well, all things considered.
Yeah, like even the Chargers game, like that interception was terrible. He threw in the red zone, right? Like that's something where you're like, all right, well, I've seen this for years. Like, how do you make that throw in that spot? Throw the ball away, take the sack, get the points. I get it, but like if you take that away, he threw for 302, he threw for 2 touchdowns, and the only other really play I remember from that game where I'm like, man, this is really on him, was where he got way too much depth in the pocket, dropping back in the end zone. And everybody's like, oh, Trent Williams gave up a safety to Frank Clark or whoever it was. No, not at all. Just Jimmy got way too much depth in the pocket. And,
And then he dipped out of the pocket before he really should have. And
they're just running into that. And then again, if we're watching football for entertainment, how can you not be entertained by a guy running directly into the sack? I know it kind of sucks, but like at that point, the 49ers were losing that game anyway, right? So at a certain point, you got to have some fun with it. All right, it's kind of funny. Kind of like I always go back to that like Wildcat play they did with Jerick McKinnon in Seattle a couple years ago. Like looking back on it, like that was hilarious, dude. Like that was absolutely hilarious. And maybe my sense of humor is a little different. I understand some 49ers fans don't have the patience that maybe I do for that stuff, but like the Atlanta game, like they lost the Atlanta game. They scored 14 points, but like that deep ball that he threw to McLeod was another one where I'm like, dude, I haven't seen that before from him. Like
right?
What was that?
That McLeod dropped?
Yeah, and I'm like, what the hell was that? And then Charlie Warner, the same thing, right up the seam. So like, even in that game, I thought he played well. And like one of the picks he threw was like a last second end of the half, like Hail Mary down the sideline to try to get in field, which honestly should have been PI. The Niners should have been gifted, in my opinion, the spot and allowed to kick a field goal there. So I just, dude, he's playing at a level. And again, I'm telling you guys this as somebody who was the most devout, like, I don't think this guy is good enough. And I think that if the 49ers had a Kirk Cousins kind of quarterback, they'd be in the NFC Championship every single year. And as the years have gone on, I've grown to realize that, yes, the frustrating plays are there, but he also does a lot of good. And at the end of the day, when you're asked to do the things an NFL quarterback is asked to do, you're going, even at the bare minimum, you're going to have some kind of impact on the game. And when the 49ers win as much as they do with him under center, you have to give the guy some kind of credit. And again, I understand the people that aren't willing to do it. I used to be in that mold too. It's a losing battle because you know what happens? He keeps winning football games. And the team, I should say this, the team wins football games when he's under center. And at a certain point, you don't have to say it's because of him, but you can't argue that it's in spite of him because I just don't think that's fair at this point,
I agree. And what we need now is Jimmy to go out against the Cardinals and make sure that we don't jinx him, because we we need Jimmy to go out and perform. What are some of your keys to victory against the Cardinals on Monday Night Football? Like, what do you think? And let's kind of stick to the offense. We spent a lot of time on Jimmy, but like, is it getting the run game going more efficiently and effectively? Is it getting Debo Samuel more involved? Is it getting more opportunities for Kittle? What do you think the 49ers have to do offensively to get this W against, hey, I'm not sure if Buda's playing or not. I saw he was dealing with some injury concerns, but they still got JJ Watt out there. They got Zaven Collins. They got some players out there. So what do the 49ers need to do on offense to get this W?
I am very, very interested to see how Kyle is going to utilize Debo and McCaffrey specifically out of the backfield in the passing game. I think that that's one area where they've really done a good job of kind of exploiting the defensive rules that on a lot of these coverages that Vance Joseph and the Cardinals are running, where you might get a look where you're going to have Christian McCaffrey one-on-one with a guy like Zaven Collins. And we saw, that first game, it was a couple of years ago, we saw like that first game that Isaiah Simmons ever played. And he's this athletic freak and all these, changing all these molds of how we look at defensive players. And the very first snap in the NFL, he's one-on-one on an island with Raheem Mostert. And I don't care how athletically gifted you are, that's not a place you want to be as a defender. And I think that Kyle's done a really good job isolating those guys out of the backfield onto their linebackers. So I'm going to be really interested to see how they're able to do that. And then the other thing I would say is the third down offense for the 49ers. Like I said, they're top 4 in the league on third down. They've been converting it. I think it's like 44%. I apologize for not knowing the exact number off the top of my head, but I know they've been converting the 4th best rate in the league. And the Cardinals were the 26th ranked third down defense in the league. So on paper, the matchup sets up favorably for them to continue their ability to extend drives. But what's really fascinating with the 49ers this year is that their problems on third down have been on third and short. Typically, it's been, they get in these 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, and they're having to pass.
That's a good point.
So this is a crazy stat, Brad. Check this out. This year, on 3rd and 8 or more, when passing the football, Jimmy Garoppolo, since he took over in the middle of week 2, is converting more of those 3rd and 8s than every other quarterback in the NFL except for Patrick Mahomes.
Ooh.
So when the 49ers have been forced to throw when they're behind the sticks like that, they've actually done a great job of doing it. But after watching Jimmy for 5.5 years or whatever it's been, I am not going to put my faith in that being a trend that continues at that rate over the course of an entire season. They need to find a way to clean up some of their short area stuff, because they've actually been one of the less efficient teams in the league when like it's 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3, which is crazy when you think about all the weapons they have, and they can utilize a McCaffrey or a Debo out of the backfield and all the motion and all the things that are at your disposal when you're that close to the line to gain. So my keys for them would be absolutely don't force Jimmy and the passing offense and the Jawan Jennings and the Brandon Ayuk's and George Kittles of the world to be Superman every week on 3rd and 9 and 3rd and 10. Find a way to get into those 3rd and shorts. And when you get there, you've had some time to hit the drawing board, Kyle. Like let's see something in these instances that are going to keep these drives alive on something other than a passing play on 3rd and 8, right? Like let's see some creativity. Let's see some stuff with McCaffrey and Debo out of the backfield. They did a great job with the orbit motion in the last game against the Chargers. I'd look for more of that, but getting to 3rd and short and converting 3rd and short would be the summary of my long-winded answer.
I know you wrote a piece on the orbit motion, just to kind of go on a little bit more of a tangent on kind of Kyle, I would say, because, hey, only Shans, right? Both you and I, and of course, the Jason Aponte, you two founders, I am definitely on board. But is Kyle need to do a little bit more with this offense with all these weapons? I think you hear that a lot, like whether it's, fans talking or things like that. But I did notice that motion was really helping get those linebackers in position to where they needed to be. Whether it was a down block, a pull, whatever it may be, those motions were really setting up the 49ers offensive run game to be successful. Do you think that is going to be something that we see more of?
Absolutely. So, like, next time you see McCaffrey or Debo run a little swing route out of the backfield and they throw the ball behind the line of scrimmage and it goes for 4 or 5 yards, whatever it is, remember that play and keep an eye out for that same motion, because that is what sets the table for those big runs out of it. Because while that play might have only gone for 4 or 5 yards, it's the threat of a play like that really keeps defenses honest. So, like, the first play of the second half, if I remember, because I wrote an article about it. I don't have the clips in front of me. If I remember correctly, McCaffrey was in the backfield to the right of Jimmy Garoppolo, and they motioned Debo behind them to the right side, and McCaffrey ran a rail route to the left side. So by Debo moving to his right, it forced the defense to move one way, following Debo and respecting the motion of Debo, which opened up a lane for McCaffrey to go up the sideline. It was like a 21-yard gain on a wheel route. And then on the very next play, they had McCaffrey running the orbit motion before the play, which moved the defense and allowed the 49ers. They ran a counter play with Debo Samuel. And just like Brad mentioned, it moved the defenders. Even if you move them a few inches, it's insane how much a few inches can change.
It matters. Oh, boy, it matters.
And even just catching the eye of a defense for that millisecond, whatever, amount of time you want to measure, can make all the difference in the world. And they were able to get those pullers into space for Debo, and it went for a 15-yard gain. So just the threat of Debo and McCaffrey motioning on these plays allowed them to pick up 36 yards right out of halftime on their first 2 plays. So I would absolutely expect to see just the threat of those guys be incorporated, because the second you start ignoring it and you start just running, it's just the orbit motion, we don't have to honor it. That's when they really, hammer home and make you pay for it.
Right. Because, when it comes to what Kyle's doing, like, he doesn't care if you like pick up on what you think he's doing, because he's going to take that and be like, perfect. If you're going to play to this leverage, you're going to play to this motion or this tell, let's say, we're going to work something off the backside. We are going to counter that. We are going to play action you to death. Like, he's got an answer for everything. Right. So he's using the defense against them, essentially, it feels like, right? Like, he's trying to see how they key on the offense, and then he's building a plan off how they're keying. So it's like, no matter what they do, he's got an answer. They just got to execute it at the end of the day and go out there and get it done. Cynthia, appreciate the super chat. She says, great show, guys. Jimmy G's improvement is positive for the 49ers. Looking forward to more scoring with all the weapons. And I think when we look at a lot of the conversation around the 49ers offense, that's really what it comes down to, right? Like, people, I think we all see these weapons and we're ready for that Madden type performance yet, and we just haven't got it yet. Would you say that's kind of when we're looking at how we expect the offense to perform? Is that kind of what you get a sense from the fan base?
I think the problem is that there's this expectation that just because you have a ton of weapons, it means you're going to score a bunch of points. And I think, again, that ignores the trend that we're seeing league-wide, where scoring is the lowest it's been in 13 years. Like, this isn't just like, the 49ers have all these weapons and they can't score. Teams all over the league are struggling to score. And even in a good year, it's very hard to score points in the NFL. So right now, since the 49ers have acquired Christian McCaffrey, which I think is kind of the last piece in the puzzle to really create this exceptional. They already had a very talented group of skill position players, but that's what really opened up this, discussion of how good the group is. They've been averaging 25.3. And then even if you go deeper, like a couple of these plays, like, if they're able to have that ball that got dropped on third down, that Brandon Ayuk dropped, he ran this great route, didn't catch the ball. It happens, right? You move on, you take the 3 points. Little things like that over the last couple of weeks, maybe that average bumps up a little bit closer to 28. And if you're scoring 4 touchdowns a week, that's exceptional. And I think that that's one thing that gets lost in translation, is that, like, there's this expectation that just because some other teams might have like a big scoring output one week and the 49ers don't, that it's like an indictment on them. But if you look at a lot of these teams that are scoring high points like that, it's also because their defense isn't built to play the way the 49ers defense is. And honestly, if you're scoring 25 points a game while your defense gives up 16 or 18 or whatever it is right now, all that matters is you're scoring more points than the other team. And the pushback that always happens is, what happens if you play the Chiefs? What happens if you play this good offense? Which is a fair argument to be had. But we haven't seen the 49ers defense close to full strength against a team like the Chiefs yet. So I think that game goes a lot differently with 100% Mooney Ward, with an Eric Armstead, with a Jimmy Ward not coming right back off of injury. So I just think the way that the 49ers are built, they're built to play this control the clock, grind out possessions, keep the defense rested and fresh, and know that we aren't probably going to have to score 30 points in a game to win. And I think that the game gets coached accordingly. And that leads to a lot of the frustrations, Brad, that you see about Kyle being too conservative and not want. So, like, a perfect thing, I apologize if this is like going off to the side, but I know a lot of people had an issue at the end of that game against the Chargers with the 49ers not going for it on 4th and 3 or 4th and 2 or whatever it was.
Oh, the section that I was sitting in had a huge problem with it. They were screaming at Kyle.
For me personally, I tweeted out before the Chargers got the ball back. I'm like, hey, honestly, like, the defense hasn't given up a point in the second half. They've only given up 42 yards. Like, I have no problem at all making a team go 80 yards in 40 seconds with no timeouts when your defense is playing like this, especially considering the previous play, you lost yardage trying to run the football. Because your alternative is if you go for it, you don't get – everybody wants the team to go for it, and then when they don't get it, it's like, what the hell are they doing? Why'd they go for it? Oh, they didn't get the field goal?
The hell, man?
Yeah, so it's like there's always like a hindsight is 20/20 kind of deal, but I just feel like Kyle coaches knowing he has the best defense in football, and as long as that defense keeps delivering, I can't fault him for it. And what happens, Brad, is I think so many people push back on Kyle and they make it this like indictment on him, or it's like I've seen things like, oh, D'Amico Ryans is, and I love D'Amico Ryans. I've been one of the loudest supporters of D'Amico Ryans that you'll find anywhere. But
you have the best D'Amico Ryans tweet like locked up in the hopper. That one with the zoom in. Every time you put it out, I'm like, this boy's cooking. Let's go.
Yeah, and so what happens, I don't know if you've seen some of these tweets where it's like, oh, well, like, get rid of Kyle and replace him with D'Amico. Like, D'Amico, and again, D'Amico deserves all of the credit in the world, but Kyle is getting all of this flack for the defense being as good as it is when he came in and it was very clear he was going to be a part of the personnel decisions. And he has said time after time since he's been with the 49ers, we want to build up the defensive line. I know from my time calling offenses, the things that have given my offenses the most trouble is a defense that's able to get after the quarterback. So when he's investing that amount of resource into the defense time after time, at a certain point, is it really fair to fault him for coaching around a defense that he built? I don't say he built, but he had the philosophy of wanting to build up. It's not like he just came in and inherited a really good defense that somebody else built, and it's, he's just an offensive guy. So that's just kind of my long-winded rant on that, because I do think it's unfair that it's like just because Kyle calls plays and is like the offensive mind, that it gets overlooked that he was kind of the driving force behind wanting to build up the defensive line. So much so that they literally took a defensive lineman in the first round of their first draft, in a draft where Patrick Mahomes and Sean Watson, some of these guys were available coming out as highly touted prospects.
Shout out Solly. Shout out our guy Solly. But is he with the Raiders still? I don't even know if he's. I don't know. But yes, I hear what you're saying, and I think you made a good point. The 49ers could have had 14 points, but it turned into 6 if you just get that catch from Ayuk and that third down kind of stuff that they had where they ran McCaffrey out of shotgun. Right there's potential two scores, so they at least put themselves in a position to score. They just got to take that next step to actually execute. And to your point, right? Like, why push? Why leave points on the field off the scoreboard potentially when you know what defense you have on the other side, right? Like, is that kind of like what you're getting at?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, would you rather have a situation where you don't get it and the other team has to go 55 yards, 60 yards, and only needs 3? Or would you rather take the 3 and force a team to have to go the full length of the field? And even if they were to convert a couple plays and get on your side of the field shrinks and you're forcing them to get 6. Like, I just think that and we talked about it at the top of the show, right? The first play of that drive, Charles Omenihu gets into the pocket and creates a turnover and the game's over. Yep. And so when you have a defensive line that's as good as theirs is and is played as good as theirs is, I have absolutely no issue trusting them. Like, right now, ask yourself this: if you're a 49ers fan, what position group do you trust on that team the most based on this year and based on the tenure of Kyle Shanahan? I personally would lean defensive line. I'd be open to hearing something else if somebody else felt differently. But because of that, it's really hard to have a fault with the coach trusting the group that has delivered for them the most time and time again.
This is why you need to follow this man. I'm telling you, whether you're reading him or you're watching him wherever he's doing shows, man, make sure you're tapping in with Jordan. This dude is a wealth of freaking knowledge, not only about the 49ers, but about anyone. And it's awesome because you pull all of that into your perspective. It's like you can pull from the way all these different teams are executing and compare and contrast it versus what the 49ers are doing, which I think brings out the best freaking coverage imaginable. um, we'll wrap it up here. I don't want to keep you too much longer. I know you and I, man, we could literally go for 3 hours without too much of an issue, but I don't want to keep you too much longer. I do want to get your keys for the 49ers defense, because what do the 49ers need to do? I'm not personally clear if Kyler is going to play or not. It's kind of trending in multiple directions. It might be Colt McCoy. Sounds like Hollywood Brown's going to be back. DeAndre Hopkins practiced today. Uh, they have some weapons on that offense. They have Cliff Kingsbury as their offensive guru right now. So I don't know how well that's working for them. But what is this 49ers defense? And again, we just kind of talked about the defense, but what do they need to do to help the 49ers get a win against the Cardinals?
Honestly, the one area that they've had any consistent struggle in this year has actually been third down. They've had some third down conversions they've allowed that has gotten them to the point where that's the only statistic I feel like that's a major statistic that's of any value where they're actually in the bottom half of the league. It feels like they're top 5 or top in general and almost everything else. The thing on paper that looks great is the Cardinals offense is 27th on third down. They're 27th in the league on third down. They're converting 34.8% of their third downs, I believe, if I remember the statistic correctly. So the biggest thing is to not, if Kyler plays, we've just seen too many times where it's so funny. One of the NFL scouts that scouted him coming out, if I apologize if I'm not getting the quote exactly right, but they wrote literally in their scouting notes that this guy runs with the football and carries like a toddler that stole your phone. And there's so many, ever since I saw that quote, I can't get it out of my head when I see him running out of the pocket. Cause yeah, it's just wild, dude. It's insane to me the way he runs around and does that. And there's so many times where it feels like the 49ers had him dead to rights. The coverage is great. And he finds a way to get out and make a play and throw the ball downfield. And the coverage busts because you can't cover for 7 or 8 seconds in the NFL. So if Kyler goes, I would say limiting him. And if Colt McCoy goes, I know everybody's kind of a little bit traumatized from that game last year, which, again, I don't think anybody saw coming. Anybody who tells you that probably is not being factual and truthful.
It was right after a big win against the Chicago Bears. The 49ers are back on track. Let's go, baby. And then get
no
smacked
Hopkins
by
either. It wasn't even just no Kyler. There was no Hopkins either. But what gets lost about that game, I feel like, is that both Jimmy Ward and Jaquiski Tartt missed that game, and the 49ers were without both of their starting safeties. And the Cardinals took, as much as we all joke about Cliff Kingsbury, he had a great game plan where he was putting those backup defenders in conflict repeatedly, where they were throwing short of the sticks and they were throwing a ton of screens and they were doing these things in the short area and forcing those guys to make tackles in the open field. And it just frankly wasn't happening. And that's always the game. Whenever anybody questions the value of a Jimmy Ward, or when they question the value of a Jaquiski Tartt, or when they start questioning the value of a Huff, those are the games that I point to. And that game specifically, for those first 2 players I mentioned, I always go back to, because you could see clear as day the difference with those guys not in. So if Colt is the one going, the guy that I would be the most concerned about, and I'm a little biased because I absolutely love this guy coming out of the draft, is Rondale Moore. I think Rondale Moore in space.
Yes, you did. You put me on Rondale Moore.
He's a special player, man, and he's had some pretty big. He's had some big time.
I got him in fantasy, so I know what production he's putting up. So I'm happy about it.
So he's the guy that I would really key in on. Obviously, you have to give your respect to DeAndre Hopkins, and if Hollywood Brown's good to go, they have a really good receiving core.
They do.
But to me, with a guy like Colt McCoy, I'd be much more concerned about what a guy like Rondale Moore could do in space. And if it's any consolation or, if there's any comfort to 49ers fans, they've been so good tackling in the open field this year. I thought this last week was a great test because Austin Eckler, to me, is one of the hardest, he's one of the hardest or coverage responsibilities in the open field. Assignments is the word I'm looking for. I'm sorry, my brain's not operating at an optimal capacity today. He's one of the toughest assignments in the league when you're talking about a throw short of the sticks and having to tackle a defender who's making plays after the catch. And I thought that the way they rallied in the football last week and were able to limit those gains by one of the best in the league would be very encouraging going into this next game. So, if Kyler plays, don't let that, toddler with the phone come out and do what he does. And if Colt McCoy plays, really key in on Rondale Moore and rally to the football the way they have been. It's so hard. The 49ers are such a good football team that I go into a lot of these games and I'm like, the only way I could see a team like the Cardinals beating them is if they just completely self-implode. And they've shown at times that's not out of the realm of possibility.
No.
So as long as they're able to stay disciplined and rally to the football like that, I think they're going to be in a great spot.
I agree. I think you said it extremely well. It's the 49ers game to lose, right? That's kind of what it feels like. They have all the opportunities to come out, get the W, and take care of business. So that's what we're hoping for a Monday night football game in Mexico City. Jordan, we got to do this more, man. I don't know what the hell I'm doing over here. We got to get you on here more often. I miss this. This just takes me back to the good old days, man. I was out in the garage and we're just chopping it up, watching film, doing all the good stuff, man, talking about draft prospects. Rondale Moore, man. Hey, I got him on a lot of fantasy teams right now because of you. So make sure you tap in with my guy. Where can they find more of your work? You were on 95.7 The Game with Bonte and Shasky, the morning roast this morning. My man's making moves. Where can they find more of your content, my friend?
You can always find me at Niners Nation. I'm putting something out there pretty much every day. So you can find, my written work will be there. For now, I work on Twitter. We'll see how that goes. I kind of
see how long Twitter lasts.
Yeah, I was kind of joking, kind of serious. If Twitter ends up crashing, I might, maybe might have to push my work to like OnlyFans or one of those platforms and really start the OnlyShans movement. So if that happens, I'll definitely I'll pass the link along to Brad so you guys can find that. But yeah, man, I love talking football. So for now, it's Twitter, Niners Nation. I try to put up, as I'm watching game film, I try to share the things that I find. I'm always bugging Brad and guys like that, Rich, Brett Rumbeck, and these guys like, hey, am I seeing this properly? And whenever I have offensive line questions, I'm always bugging Brad. We'll text each other at like 2:30 in the morning. Like, it's so funny. We're up watching game film at like super odd hours of the night.
Like, hey, did you see this? What he did right here?
So Twitter and Niners Nation. It's not, and again, it's a great honor to be there. I know a lot of you guys know Jason. Jason's doing writing for them as well as Andrew. Kyle Posey's there. Akash is there. There's just a fantastic team.
Squad.
A great group of people there that are doing good content. And if you happen to like my particular brand of content, you can find a good amount of it there a few days a week.
Absolutely. Hey, shout out Kyle, man. He's built a roster over there. He's got some talented, whether it's creators, writers, podcasters, they're cooking over there at Niners Nation. Shout out to the whole squad. And of course, shout out to you, Jordan, as always, for giving us your time and your knowledge, man. It's bar none. I'm telling you. GM Jordan right here. Make sure you tap in with my guy. As always, thank you, Jordan, for your time. Thank you to the Sourdough Squad for, of course, supporting the channel. The super chats were on point today. Appreciate you guys. As always, like, subscribe, smash that like button, do all that good stuff. Appreciate you. But we're out of here for now. Peace. Smash that like button if you haven't already. Love to see it.